In this video, I will be painting a floral composition in the style of French Impressionists. Instead of oils, however, I will be using artist gouache. I love French Impressionism of late 19th century, and if you watch my channel, you saw several replicas of Renoir's paintings that I did, and also I did a Monet that you see here. I'm a water media artist, so I didn't use oils. I used acrylics and gouache. And finally, I decided it's time to apply what I learned from these exercises to my own piece of art. I will be sharing my discoveries throughout this video, so hopefully you will find some useful information that you can apply to your own artwork as well. I found this beautiful photo and I'm going to try to paint it in Impressionist style. As usual with opaque paint, I don't like starting with a white sheet of paper, so I'm going to tone the whole sheet with blue. The background in the photo is gray, but Impressionism is all about colors, so I want to add more color, not just to the main subject, but also to the background. The wash I'm applying is Royal Blue by Sennelier. While my background is drying, let's prepare the gouache. I'm using Reeves brand of gouache, and I will only need a few colors. I have lemon yellow, medium yellow, brilliant red, ultramarine, and emerald green, and of course I will need white. I'm using M.Graham's artist gouache titanium white. You see it in a lot of my videos, this giant tube. So this is the first lesson that I learned from Impressionists, using bright colors but limited palette and not using any black or earth tones. First thing I need to do is block in my composition, my flowers. I'm doing that with that kind of coral pink that is predominant tone there. I don't want any pencil lines on my page, so I'm drawing with my brush directly. And with opaque colors, as you know, it's very easy to make corrections. So if something ends up in the wrong place, I can always paint on top of it and correct it. I like those stripes of light on the surface that the vase is sitting on, so I'm going to put that in as well. And now I am going to roughly paint my overall shapes. So I am looking at the middle tone of each flower, the color that I see not in the shadow and not in the bright light, but in between, in the mid-tone. And that allows me to paint the general form of the flower. Before I go into details, I have to have some information on paper. Also need to block in the vase and just take a look at what I have on the page, because I don't have a drawing. If you don't feel comfortable or just don't want to be drawing with the brush, you can of course use the pencil or even rub some charcoal on the printout of your reference photo and transfer it onto your page. I'm using an expensive sheet of watercolor paper. For gouache, it doesn't really matter if it's cotton watercolor paper or not, as long as it's sturdy enough to hold the paint. So gouache will probably cover it, but I like to draw with my brush, so I didn't do a pencil drawing. And the next thing I'm going to do is start working on my darks. Opaque colors are usually painted from dark to light, with highlights being applied last. So I am using my ultramarine blue to also kind of generally block in those dark passages. Middle portion of the stems will be very dark. And I can also start working on the background. Working with broad general strokes. Light colors of gouache darken as they dry, so my flowers darkened a little bit after they dried. So now I am going to paint after I blocked everything in. I'm starting on the details and I'm going to paint light midtones. So I added a little more white to my mixture. I am going to start working on the details on those carnations. And that was another thing I learned from studying Impressionists, is not working with big shapes, filled in shapes. That's traditional for gouache, kind of poster style, and also traditional for watercolors, where we work with big washes of color. I think for gouache, those large flat passages sometimes end up looking, just not interesting enough. There's not enough variety in them for the viewers. I saw that Impressionists use kind of small feathered brush strokes that they apply next to each other in different colors. So I decided to use that for my gouache. So small brush strokes with different colors. And that's how I hope to achieve visual interest and variety in my painted surface. I have two brushes. I try to remember to use one brush for light colors and the other brush for dark colors, so I don't have to wash them constantly and bring a lot of water into my paint, because I like creamy, thick consistency of gouache that's similar to oil paint. So it's easy to work with two brushes at the same time. If you ever studied oil painting, that's what they do as well. They usually even have a separate brush for each color, so they don't have to clean brushes while they're painting. Gouache is one of my favorite mediums. I do love watercolor, and on my channel you can see a lot of flowers painted with watercolor and also with gouache and watercolor together. I have a whole playlist on painting flowers and landscapes. I'll leave you the link in the video description, but I find gouache a lot more forgiving as the medium, much easier to work with. So for me, painting with gouache is kind of a relaxing activity. I don't have to rush before things dry. I don't have to carefully plan my painting because I can easily make changes. If you never tried gouache, I hope you give it a try, because it's just a very nice medium to work with. It doesn't have all that complicated cleanup that would be required if you painted with oils, let's say, like Impressionists did. Okay, let's work on this big white flower. It's hip rose or maybe a peony, I'm not sure. And it looks white, but if you look at it closely, you will see that in the light it has more blue in it, and in the shadows it has a little bit of yellow. So that's what I'm trying to convey. And as you know, Impressionists were great at detecting all those subtle variations of color in nature and in flowers as well. You see that I'm squeezing out really small daubs of gouache. Gouache is meant to be used while it's fresh and moist, so it's not a good idea to squeeze out all your paints and let them dry, because if you try to reconstitute them with water, you can, but they will never have the consistency of fresh gouache straight out of the bottle. So I try not to waste my paint, and I squeeze just a little bit, as much I think will be necessary for my painting session, and use up all the color. And then if I need more, it's better to just squeeze out a little more and not let gouache dry. You can use it for maybe like preparatory washes, but you won't be able to paint impasto with it. Alright, I'm going to work on the vase, finding all those little color variations in the glass. And that's another great thing about gouache. If you're interested in painting glass objects, it would be a pretty complicated subject for watercolors. Watercolor is pretty hard to control, and then you have to look for all those little areas of light and shadow, especially if you're painting something like crystal. So gouache would be a great medium to start with and study glass, and then maybe move on to watercolor. I'm working on the edges of the flowers where they intersect with those dark stems. That was another thing I noticed that Impressionists do, and I really liked it, is the way they softened and kind of blurred the edges. They were not big fans of hard edges. Everything was very soft and kind of painterly. So I'm trying to imitate that to a certain extent in my painting as well. Okay, I need to work on the table surface. The vase casts a shadow, so we need to paint that. What I'm painting now is probably going to be too dark. Well, I'm pretty sure it's going to be too dark, but this is just the base of my shadow. I'm going to apply a lighter tone on top and mix them together. And blending gouache requires very little water. You just need to have a damp brush, and if you're using artist gouache, which has gum arabic binder, even if your previous layer is dry, once you apply another wet layer on top of it, the layer underneath it will be re-wetted, and it's easier to blend them together and get the tone that you need. And I don't want to lose those stripes of light. I want to restate them a little bit. I think they add an interesting element to my composition. So working on the table and trying not to paint it as a big gray surface, but to find color in it using small feathery strokes like Impressionists did. And of course I don't see all these colors in the table, but the point is to use the same colors I used in the bouquet and distribute them all over my painting. That was a big lesson from Impressionists. So I am going to add all kinds of purples, blues, greens, reds into that table surface. Let's darken the background behind the flowers too, so they stand out better. If you're interested in painting flowers, I have a class where I use watercolor with white gouache to paint flowers. It's a very effective technique for white or any light colored flowers, especially if you want to paint them on dark background. So I'll leave you the link in the description if you want to check that out. The class is available on my website. And I want to mention it again that before I started learning from Impressionists, I would try to smooth out the background and also the table surface, and it will look kind of flat and uninteresting. But I think using those multicolored strokes gives my painting very interesting, cool texture. And it's almost like it's breathing, and you can see the depth of space and the light playing on the surfaces. So I'm really glad I spent all that time and effort on copying and studying the great masters. And those stripes of light that I painted looked out of place because they were so straight. So I kind of feathered them out as well a little more. And I'm going to lighten the shadow as well. It's dark close to the vase, but it's a lot lighter towards us. So I can add some lighter brush strokes, some more colors in there, some more visual interest. A few more details on that white flower, maybe work on the edge a little more. I can bring in that darker background inside the flower to separate the petals so it doesn't look like a big white blob, but has some structure. And the last thing I need to do is restore some of the highlights that I lost while I was working on my painting. So pure white gouache, small brush, and I'm going to paint a few highlights on the flowers, on that white flower and also on the carnations. almost done. Here's a bouquet of flowers painted in Impressionist style using artist gouache. Let me know in comments if French Impressionism is your favorite art period or which one is your favorite. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video here on Time Studios channel. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!